Benno and the Knight of Broken Glass by Meg Wiviot, illustrated by Josie Bizayan. Benno the cat lived at number 5 Rosenstrasse in Berlin, just a few blocks from the new synagogue. He had a nice warm bed near the furnace, where Hans, the housemeister, left him fresh milk every night. On Friday nights, Benno visited the Adler family in apartment 3B. He watched Mrs. Adler light Sabbath candles, Mr. Adler slice a braided loaf of bread, and Sophie sing from a book she held close. After dinner, Sophie fed him scraps of chicken. On Sundays after church, Benno visited the Schmidts across the hall in apartment 3A for their family lunch. Before Mrs. Schmidt cleared the dishes for dessert, Inga sneaked bits of schnitzel to him under the table. On weekday mornings, Benno watched Herr Adler and Herr Schmidt leave for work. He waited as Inga came out of her apartment and knocked on Sophie's door. Benno purred when the girls knelt to wish him Guten Morgen. Then he followed them to school. During the day, Benno strolled around the neighborhood. Sometimes Moishi the butcher fed him scraps, and Frau Gerber, the grocer's wife, scratched his ears. Often he took naps nestled among the bolts of fabric in the sunny window of Mitzi Stein's dress shop. In the late afternoons, Benno followed Inga and Sophie to the playground. He sat high in a tree as they played on the swings or dashed about in a game of tag with their friends. Benno was welcomed by all, even into apartment 2G, where Professor Goldfarb was too busy with his studies to pay attention when the cat curled up on his desk. At night, Benno returned to his bed beside the furnace in the basement of number 5 Rosenstrasse. He drank his milk and fell asleep, listening to the comforting sounds of the people above. Then things began to change. Moishi the butcher had no scraps for Benno. Frau Gerber, the grocer's wife, had no time to scratch his ears. And Mitzi yelled scat when Benno tried to nap in the window. One night, men in brown shirts lit a bonfire on Rosenstrasse. As they threw books and paper onto the fire, the crowds cheered. Benno fled and tried to hide inside apartment 2G. But Professor Goldfarb shooed him away. "I must save the books," the professor muttered. And a few days later, Benno watched Inga leave for school without knocking on Sophie's door. He waited a long time before Sophie came out and walked to school alone. Neither girl wished him Guten Morgen. After school, Benno watched Inga with her friends at the playground. Sophie hurried past the park, her head low. Later, when Benno went home, he found the door to apartment 3B locked. Rosenstrasse was still a busy street, but the people were no longer friendly. The men in brown shirts strutted about with their heads held high. Benno walked carefully, dodging their heavy black boots. The neighbors and shopkeepers went quietly about their business, their eyes lowered. Then came a night like no other. The air filled with screams and shouts, sounds of shattering and splintering glass, and the bitter smell of smoke. Benno cowered in a doorway. He watched the brown-shirted men swarm over the neighborhood, smashing the windows and looting shops. At Moishi's butcher shop, they overturned the refrigerators, leaving meat to spoil on the ground. At Mitzi Stein's shop, they ripped the bolts of fabric and threw the sewing machines into the street. Benno saw the beautiful new synagogue set ablaze. The Torah scrolls were dragged into the street and trampled. Herr Gerber's grocery remained untouched. Back at number 5 Rosenstrasse, Benno saw the housemeister let the brown shirts into the building and direct them to certain apartments. They broke into Professor Goldfarb's apartment and tore his books and papers from their shelves. "I must save the books," the professor cried as he was dragged away. Benno ran upstairs. In apartment 3B, the mob was breaking the Adler's furniture and throwing books out the window, even the ones Sophie sang from every Friday night. The Schmidt's apartment was untouched. The next morning, Benno saw Herr Schmidt leave for work. Then Inga left for school. He waited for Sophie, but the Adler's door remained closed. Outside, smoldering fires stung Benno's eyes. His paws were cut and sore from the broken glass that littered the streets. Smoke from the gilded dome of the new synagogue rose into the morning sky. Mitzi Stein was sweeping up the glass in front of her store. Herr Gerber's grocery was open for business as usual. Benno could not find Moishi the butcher. He never saw Professor Goldfarb or Sophie and her family again. Benno continued to sleep in his bed by the furnace. Hans continued to give him fresh milk, and Frau Gerber scratched his ears. Benno still watched Herr Schmidt leave for work. He still followed Inga to school. But life on Rosenstrasse would never be the same.